Hey everyone. So today I want to talk to you about Rogerian or Rogerian. Some people pronounce it one way, some people pronounce it the other. I like Rogerian, so we're going to go with that. Uh, Rogerian arguments. So, what is that? What are we talking about? All right, so before we can get into what a Rogerian argument is, I need to recap a couple of things. So, first, you've seen this before in your notes, but there are four basic fundamentals of any argument. Okay, and these are fundamentals that exist if the argument is good natured, as in, like, the people that are arguing are actually trying to have a legitimate discussion rather than people bickering on the internet. That's not necessarily a true argument. A true argument is when I sit down with you and we try to hash out what are our differences. Why do I see things the way that I see them? Why do you see things the way that you see them? And um, depending on the style of the argument, we might approach things differently. So you're mostly familiar with a classical argument, and that is where you present your side, you present all of your data, all of your facts, all of your information, and you attempt to address your opponent's side, and then you refute it. You basically say, this is why you're wrong, and this is why I'm right. That's a classical argument, okay? You're familiar with that. You've been doing that basically ever since you started learning about argumentation in high school. Then there's two other types. The Tolman argument, which is something that we'll get into later if we have time. And then you have what we're going to talk about today, which is the Rogerian argument. Well, more on that in just a minute. The point is that each one of these types, if the argument is true, as far as, like, I'm not saying like the content is true, but if you're going into the argument with good faith, with not the intention to deceive or belittle your opponent, but actually to come to an understanding and to hopefully get them to understand you, then you're going to have these four fundamentals. A Rogerian argument is going to focus primarily on the fairness doctrine, presenting the evidence adequately and fairly, and the convention of self-risk, which is basically the idea that you may be wrong. You may not have all the answers. So, with that in mind, we also talked in the past about inductive and deductive reasoning. Well, a Rogerian argument focuses primarily on deductive reasoning, which, as it says right here, is setting up the general principle and applying it to examples. So, for example, dairy products make me sick. Ice cream is a dairy product. Therefore, ice cream makes me sick. A Rogerian argument is going to focus on that same style of logic, where basically you have an idea, and then you present examples, and you match those examples up with your idea, your hypothesis. I have a hypothesis. Here are some examples. Do they match up with my hypothesis? More on that in just a minute. So I know I went through that kind of quickly, but those are all recap. And if you want to hear more about deductive and inductive reasoning, look back at your notes, look back at my older video. If you want to look at the fundamentals, again, go back and look at your notes. So let's move on to Rogerian arguments. It all began with this man, Carl Rogers, hence the name Rogerian Argument. Basically, he was a psychologist, and you don't need a history lesson on the guy, but the basics here are that he believed that your classical argument and your Tolman argument, they're all fine and good, but they're really confrontational, and they're really kind of set up, your classical argument is really kind of set up on a system of I'm right and you're wrong, and I'm going to basically bully you with facts and data, ethos, pathos, logos, kairos, until you believe as I do. There's a time and a place for that, and Carl Rogers admits that there is a time and a place for that, like a courtroom, for example. But fundamentally, Okay, he believed that if you really want to change someone's mind, if you really want to convince somebody that you're right, a softer approach is necessary. And so basically, he said, if you really want to convince somebody that you're right, you need to understand where they're coming from and see things from their perspective so that you can um, better understand why they believe what they believe, and not because you want to defeat them or crush their worldview, but so that you can come to an understanding and they can come to an understanding and you can find common ground. That's a key word I want you, or a key phrase I want you to keep in mind with the Rogerian argument. It's all about common ground. I'm not trying to defeat you. I'm not trying to belittle you. I'm not trying to throw my ideas in your face and convince you I'm right and you're wrong. I'm trying to see things from your perspective and get you to see things from my perspective so that we can meet in the middle so that actual genuine change can take place. Because he believed that if let's say I make a really compelling argument using a classical model, and maybe I convince you, maybe I don't. There's always going to be that thought in the back of your mind that basically I beat you down with my ideas, that you're basically giving up or giving in, and that even if you agree with me, even if you go along with what I'm saying, that you don't truly believe it. You're not invested in it. A Rogerian argument seeks to make both parties happy by doing a little give and take. I give a little, you give a little, and we meet in the middle, kind of like mediation, um, to where both parties can walk away from the table feeling satisfied. Not necessarily I'm 100% right and you're 100% wrong, but we found a compromise. Okay? And the goal of any Rogerian argument is to keep the peace. Don't let it devolve into belittling or name calling or logical fallacies. Don't let it get to that point. So, why would you ever use this? Well, it has its strengths and weaknesses like anything else, and it depends on what your goal is. It's most useful, as I point out here, when your opponent is resistant and your primary goal, your primary need is to be heard. Not necessarily to convince, but to just get your voice out there, get your opinion out there. I have merit. Um, I can't think of the word right now, but I have merit. I have just as much right as you do. And so the key phrase here is when you're desiring diplomacy over being right or wrong, this is the argument style for you. Um, like in a marriage or any sort of relationship. It's not about me being right and my wife being wrong, or her being right, which is most often the case, or, her being right and me being wrong. It's not about that. It's about compromise. That's what makes a marriage successful: communication and compromise. And unfortunately, such is life, you're going to argue in a relationship. You're going to have arguments. So, I'm not trying to, prove that she's wrong and that I'm right. I'm trying to find compromise so that we can both walk away happy. Diplomacy. That's the benefit. And so this style is built for that in mind. Okay. And just like any other argument system, there is a structure. And in this particular type of argument, there is a 6-point structure. Okay. You're going to see this structure in any good Rogerian argument. It should follow this blueprint. You might see a Rogerian argument that kind of goes through and and does these 6 steps and then maybe kind of goes back and does a few more, this, that, and the other. But you're going to see all 6 of these. Okay. And again, the key here is common ground. So let's talk about these 6 points. The first is your introduction. And in the introduction section of a Rogerian argument, you are trying to present the position. You're presenting the problem. Okay. You're putting it out in the open. You're not trying to trick anyone. There's no trickery in a Rogerian argument. You're not trying to do a little gotcha game. You are simply saying, here's the issue that I have. Here's the issue that you and I need to resolve. Here's the problem I'm having. Let's talk about it. And you put it out there in the open. For example, and I'm going to use the running example through these 6 steps of violent video games. So let's say there's a group of very frustrated parents who have recently seen a rise in neighborhood crime. Okay, and they're blaming it on violent video games. Let's say, for the sake of argument, no pun intended, that I am a representative of the gaming community. Maybe I'm a game designer, maybe I just play a lot of video games, whatever. But I'm taking the stance of video games don't cause violence in people. And these very concerned parents are taking the opposite stand, that the rise in neighborhood crime by these gaming teenagers can be blamed on the video games that they're playing, GTA or whatever. Okay, so there's our problem. They're concerned, rightfully so, about the rise in crime. And I'm concerned, rightfully so, in defending the thing that I love, the thing that I represent. So we have a problem. Move on to step 2. Well, back to step 1 for just a second. So what do? I present the problem, and I present the mutual concern that we both have, which is, obviously these parents are concerned about the rise in crime. I'm also concerned about the rise in crime. I don't fault them for their concern. I have no problem with that. They're totally allowed to be concerned. It's a great thing to be concerned about. Where we have our issue is what's at blame here. So let's move on to step 2. Step 2 is a summary of opposing views. Okay, so what I need to do is I need to show my opponents that I understand where they're coming from. And I do that right off the bat. So I present the problem. Here's the problem, rise in violence. Okay. And before I get into what I believe, I need to show my opponent that I get where they're coming from. I'm like, look, you're clearly concerned parents. You're clearly upset about the rise in violence. And I get it. I feel for you. Violence is a problem in our society, and any good society that wants to thrive and continue needs to curb the violence. I get that. I'm with you on that 100%. And I want to listen to you. So what does this do? Right off the bat, this takes the defensiveness that your opponent would automatically be on in any argument, and it lessens the defensiveness. This is a great thing because it allows, when your defenses are down, you're more likely to listen. You're more likely to be receptive to other views. If I just come in and you're wrong and you're stupid and here's all these facts and here's all this data to prove that you are wrong and you have no idea what you're talking about, if I do that, they're immediately going to be on the defensive and they're going to shut down and they're not going to listen to a word I have to say. So I don't do that. I say, here's the problem. Step 1, lay it out there. Step 2, here's what I'm hearing you say about why you have an issue with this and why you're blaming it on this. Here's what I understand you to think. And I'm not judging you. No judgment in this. I'm not saying you're wrong. I'm not saying you're stupid. I'm not saying you're ignorant. I'm simply saying, here's how I think you believe this to be. Am I right or am I wrong? And seek clarification. Am I right? Is that what you think? Is that the position you're taking? Do I have it understood correctly? And what that does is it allows them to speak their piece, speak their mind, and it gets them off this defensiveness. So right off the bat, they're receptive and they're thinking to themselves, wow, this guy really cares about what I have to say. Move on to step 3. In step 3, you validate the areas of their argument that you actually agree with. So you say, okay, I get it. So here's the issue we have, violence in the neighborhood. Here's what you believe. Here's what I think you believe about the cause. Here's where I agree with you. Here are the issues I agree with you. Here are the points that I think you're making that I actually agree with you on. So let's get that off the table. Here's where I agree. Too many innocent people are dying as a cause of random shootings. And those random shootings often resemble things in video games. Totally get that. I agree with you. And these shootings, these killings, this violence does cost the lives of people we hold dear. And they do resemble a lot of video games that we see. Totally 100% on board with you on that. So let's move on to the next part. So now my opponent is not only not defensive, but they're actually calmed down. They're actually like, oh, this guy, hold on a second. This guy, he's listening to me. He's understanding me. I feel heard. I feel understood. I feel like he cares. Do you see how that could really help get people to listen to you if they feel those things? If you feel heard, if you feel like that person cares about you, you're going to be much more likely to listen to what they have to say. So the next step is, now that you have them on your side, at least receptive to hearing your side, now you tell them, here's what I think. And you present your logos. Now again, it's not derogatory, it's not accusatory, I'm not playing a gotcha game. I'm simply saying, here's what I think. And here's the data that I have to back it up. Here's my logos, here's my ethos. I'm not out to get you, I'm not out to win. I'm just showing you this is why I think differently. I've already presented to you why I have heard you, and I've already given you a chance to speak your turn. So it's my turn. And then, once you've laid it out, you've laid out the issue, you've laid out their position, you've laid out your position. Now, find some common ground. Where can you guys agree? Look at my example here. Something, of course, must be done to lessen the amount of violence in society. We can agree on that. There's too much violence. Perhaps if we might point to video games as a potential cause, I'm not saying I agree with that, but if we're going to go that route, then yeah, let's go ahead and monitor video games to some extent. Let's put labels, rating labels on the video games and restrict the sale of certain violent video games to minors. That might go a long way. I can get on board with that. It doesn't prevent me from playing video games. It doesn't take those video games off the shelves, but it does take them out of the hands of people that you might be concerned about having them. And I can get on board with that. Sure, let's do it. And then the last step is find a compromise. I'm not saying I'm ever going to be 100% on board with you. And I'm not saying you're ever going to be 100% on board with me, and that's fine. But is there somewhere where we can meet in the middle? And if there is, let's talk about it. And in this last step, it's up to you as the person making the argument to show them why they would benefit from finding this common ground with you. Where can they get something out of this? Where can you get something out of this? It's not all about you, it's about us. So here's how we can both benefit from taking these small steps towards the middle with each other. And that is a Rogerian argument. And you'll see with several famous examples throughout history of Rogerian arguments that this can be highly, highly effective if done correctly. Gandhi used this to huge effect. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. used this method to great effect. When you have big social issues, this can be the best, the most powerful method, because nobody feels like a loser. And while we don't necessarily feel like a winner, it's important that nobody feels like a loser. Everybody stands to gain something from this. And that is the power of a Rogerian argument.